All right, good morning or good evening if you are in Central Europe right now. Welcome to episode 50 something of PatristiCast. I'm your host, as always, John Solheid, and today I'm very welcome to bring back a frequent guest on this show, Professor Christoph Markschies. If you've seen the channel before, you don't really need an introduction, but I'm going to do it anyways. Professor Markschies is president of the Berlin Brandenburg Academy of Sciences and Humanities, and he is a professor of ancient Christianity or patristics at the Humboldt University in Berlin. And he, among his many hats, is one we're going to talk about today. That is as I believe you're the lead researcher of a project going on out there, Alexandrian and Antiochian biblical exegesis in late antiquity. Professor Markschies, thank you for coming back.
It's a great pleasure to be part of your wonderful podcast and to all hearing the podcast in the morning, the afternoon, or the evening. A very warm welcome. It's a pleasure to talk with you, to chat with you.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you, Christoph. And for you listeners out there, please take that to heart and hit that like and subscribe button so this thing gets distributed more. Okay. So we're going to talk eventually about the work that you guys are doing out in Berlin right now in this Alexandrian and Antiochian biblical exegesis in late antiquity, where you're producing critical editions. But let's talk about the lineage first, because your project is has inherited a rich tradition of German textual criticism and scholarship. Perhaps we could talk a little bit about that trajectory. And this is going to go back again to one of the frequent subjects of this podcast, Adolf von Harnack, and basically the Prussian Academy, correct?
Exactly. Uh, we have to start not in Berlin and with the Prussian Academy,
Mm.
but with the Imperial Austrian Academy in
Uh,
Vienna,
uh,
because there was always a, a kind of competition between the two empires, the very old tradition Austrian Empire and the quite new German Prussian-dominated empire.
mm,
And the Austrian Academy, some of the volumes are behind me, began in the 1860s with a Latin Church Fathers
mm,
edition. Latin Church Fathers, Augustine, for example, but also Jerome and later fathers. And this was one of these typical 19th century critical editions looking for the leading manuscript, ancient or medieval manuscript, and doing up a critical edition reconstructing the original text, the Urtext, the Omega.
mhm,
And there was a preface in the Latin language. And when Harnack came, 1888, to Berlin, he thought I should step into the competition to Vienna and added the Greek Christian
mm,
fathers.
mm,
So the Latin fathers in Vienna and the Greek Christian fathers in Berlin. And Harnack's idea was, as the traditional German school teacher's idea, Greek is more original.
yeah.
We should read Plato and not the Latin translation of Cicero's Timaeus. But the Greeks are the owners of the original ideas, and Latin fathers are only copying, Ambrose copying the Cappadocian fathers, for example. And so also Harnack was in favor of Augustine. That was surprisingly, also he was strictly against parts of his theology. He was in favor of him and did abridged collections of sentences of Augustine, but there was no possibility to do an edition of the works of Augustine. This was already done in the Church Fathers Commission, in the Kirchenväterkommission of the Imperial and Royal Austrian Academy in Vienna. And so the Prussian Academy, to avoid the impression that this is a pure copy for the Greek fathers, changed some things. And the most interesting thing is that the prefaces were done in the German language, not in the Latin language. This was quite clear, immediately a problem in the First World War, because Belgian editors weren't willing and able to write German prefaces. And so the idea of German prefaces to Greek Church Fathers editions was more, how to say, imperialistic than an idea of modernization than Harnack thought. But there was still a debate, I remember, in the 70s and 80s with Oxford classical texts, prefaces in the Latin or in the English language. So modernization, and also the language of the apparatus, which is traditionally also in German critical editions in the Latin language, was done in the German language. So one third were more modern than the editions of the Vienna Church Father corpus, but in fact it was quite clear a copy of the in the field of competition with the Viennese Academy. And I'm extremely happy to declare now we have very close collaborations with the Viennese project today, and we have close relations, and members of the Viennese project are members of our advisory council and so far. So competition disappeared with a political framework of competition. And one thing also interesting is that Harnack was a genius of organizing projects. The first thing is, when looking to traditional GCS editions, and I should pick up one from the shelves behind me. So I have to ask for some patience. I will bring the first volume. One moment, please. There is an alphabetical order in my bookshelves, and so H for Hippolytus is exactly behind me. A is in this direction, and the other volumes of the alphabet are also in the other direction. And Hippolytus is not in the center of my books, but in the order, in the center of the order. And this is the first volume. And when looking to this, this is not the sign of the Academy. And that's also not the sign of the publishing house, but it's the sign of a foundation, and the imprint of the foundation is here, and you can read Elisabeth Wenzel-Heckmann Foundation, Hermann und Elise, geborene Heckmann-Wenzel Foundation. And that was of a large building cooperation owner in Berlin who built up churches and housings and lots of public buildings. And when he died, his wife, Elisabeth Wenzel-Heckmann, donated lots of money to the German Archaeological Institute and also to the Academy, because Harnack was a quite charming person, and he charmed Elisabeth Wenzel Heckmann. And so nearly all the volumes until 1945 were financed by Elisa Wenzel Heckmann Foundation. And this foundation survived until today, but because of inflation and political
Yeah.
catastrophes, this foundation is only able to fund, let's say, one small meeting or traveling funding for employees or members of the academy. And the first volume, when looking to there is written Hippolytus Werke, erster Band, so the works of Hippolytus, first volume, exegetical and homiletical writings. And then it's said, edited im Auftrage der Kirchenväterkommission. So the Berlin Academy established immediately such a Church Fathers Commission. And the Church Fathers Commission was directed by Adolf von Harnack. And there were also quite other well-reputed members, for example, Ulrich von Wilamowitz-Möllendorf, who was extremely critical against theologians. He thought theologians are unable, because of the lack of professional knowledge of Greek, to edit Greek texts. And the problem was Harnack was theologian and director of the corpus. So there was from the beginning on a tension, and Wilamowitz was reading the proofs. And when there is written in the apparatus a conjecture with Wilamowitz, that was a result of the process of Wilamowitz and others' reading of the proofs. And Wilamowitz, which was quite unfriendly, also asked pupils and friends of him to write bad reviews of volumes to demonstrate. Also, he was in the commission responsible for editing the text that Harnack wasn't able to do a professional Greek reading, which was quite unfriendly, so to say. But there was also a personal, how to say, a personal tension, because Wilamowitz married the daughter of the famous ancient historian Theodor Mommsen. And Theodor Mommsen was not so friendly to his now relative and his daughter's husband, Wilamowitz, because he thought, as a political liberal, Wilamowitz was extremely conservative. In the preface of his memoirs, he wrote, after 1918, Germans have taken away the traditional flag of the empire and brought the flag of the republic on top, and now he, as a traditional Prussian, has to die out to end his life. And so Mommsen thought the far more nicer son-in-law would be Harnack, and was a little bit angry about his daughter and his son-in-law. And so there was a huge tension in the Church Fathers Commission of the Prussian Academy. Also a member of the Church Fathers Commission was Hermann Diels. Hermann Diels, responsible for the Greek medical writers, also for the Aristotle edition and the commenters on commentaries and commentators on Aristotle of the Prussian Academy, and extremely helpful in reading the proofs and correcting editions. And then August Dillmann, an Old Testament scholar and one of the founders of the of all the science in the traditional Ethiopian languages, and he was part later, together with Hugo Gressmann, for the Ethiopian and for the Syriac translations, Eusebius, the Theophania, for example, the Syriac text that was done by Gressmann. And also was quite interesting that because of the emperor's help, Harnack had a close relation to the emperor. Also, he was a liberal. Um, and the emperor donated to the project money to employ one Hilfsarbeiter, a kind of additional worker, a quite downplaying term because it was Carl Schmidt, the famous Coptologist. And so all the Coptic texts were done by Schmidt. And Harnack began the work with the, I had to move to the other shelf on the other side of my studio, his Literaturgeschichte, the historiography of ancient Christian literature, and the chronology, 4 volumes, were a kind of preparatory work to have an inventory of Greek Christian writers and their manuscripts. That's a manuscript-based history of ancient Christian literature. So when he came into Berlin, he was already prepared. And then Harnack did a third thing of 4, which was a sign of his being a genius of organization. And that was traveling through the country and asking school teachers, would you like to edit Hippolytus for my new series? And a little bit unfriendly thing was that he visited a lot of people already under contract with the Teubner, with the famous Teubner publishing house, because Teubner was planning a series of ancient Greek Christian writers, and that series collapsed completely because all people, how to say, were victims of the charming Harnack and already in contract with Teubner signed new contracts. And this is also quite interesting. The contract, the publishing contract of the series with the publishing house Hinrichs.
Oh, yeah.
Hinrichs is a very traditional Leipzig publishing house of the late 18th, early 19th century, and one of these publishing houses which at the end of the 19th century tried to get influence in the publishing market of Germany. And this is not a contract by the Academy, but a personal contract by Harnack. So Harnack got all the money for the series and not the Academy. The Academy had to pay for every volume, and the Harnack got the money for the sold copies. And that changed only later when Harnack in 1930 died, and some years before Hans Lietzmann became his successor. And in the first volume, there is a kind of very small preface, and I'm translating a little bit of the preface. The class of philosophy and history of the Royal Prussian Academy has in February 1891 a commission consisting of Dillman, the Ethiopian scholar, von Gebhardt, that was a close friend of Harnack at the University of Leipzig and later the director of Leipzig University Library, Loofs and Mommsen. Loofs was a pupil and a friend of Harnack, ancient church historian and patristic scholar in Halle, and Mommsen. So Mommsen was protecting the better son of Lore, his beloved friend. And I think Mommsen always thought Harnack was how he wished a son, or how he wished a son-in-law. So the Academy set up such a commission to edit all Greek reports and writings. And that's interesting that there is said reports and also the German term Urkunden. So not only complete writings, don't know, the commentary on John by Origen, but also this idea collections of written documents. So the famous documents on the history of the Arian crisis, die Urkunden zur Geschichte des Arianischen Streits, which were published in the De Gruyter Publishing House, are originally a plan of the Griechische Christliche Schriftsteller and of Harnack's series. So Harnack's idea was not only complete writings, but all things related, all things written related to the Greek part of Christianity, and all translations. And for the translations, they established a series which was a little bit earlier, die Texte und Untersuchungen zur antiken christlichen Literatur. And so this was the series accompanying the editorial series, Greek Christian Writers, Griechische Christliche Schriftsteller. And the idea was to have this series to publish the original text of the translations and only a German translation in the main series. So Syriac texts in the auxiliary series and their German translations, reconstructions of the Greek text in a German translation and the Greek series. So there is a wonderful, I love Sir Henry Chadwick, but once he and Peter Brown coined the term Third World of Ancient Christianity for Syriac, Ethiopian, and Coptic languages and Christianity. And I think, as I know, Peter Brown and Henry Chadwick, his famous teacher, this was a little bit ironical expression. So, but here, the Syriac, Ethiopian, and Coptic texts, Armenian texts in the Texte und Untersuchung, and only Greek and German translation. And German translations are far more later than these Christian Oriental versions in the main series. And the original title was different from today. It was the Greek Christian Writers of the First Three Centuries. Die griechischen christlichen Schriftsteller der ersten 3 Jahrhunderte. Why the first three? Because Harnack, as a liberal Protestant, was convinced that the 4th century is highly problematic. Bad philosophy influenced, I'm a little bit doing a caricature and kidding, but Harnack was thinking the 4th century should be excluded. It is not part of the, he used terms by Goethe, a kind of very original first phase of Christianity. And it was Hans Lietzmann, his successor after Harnack died 1930, who said that's a completely artificial separation of the first 3 and following centuries. But a sign of this separation is that the Gregory of Nyssa edition, exactly above my head, the dark blue and the a little bit light blue volumes, they were not also, the publication began in Berlin with Werner Jäger's Contra Eunomium. This is a Berlin work and was done by a member of the Academy, Werner Jäger, but not included into the series because it was 4th century and not 3rd century, and only after Lietzmann stepped in, it was too late to move in Athanasius, the Berlin edition of Athanasius, and the edition of Gregory of Nyssa into the Berlin Church Fathers corpus. And I think one of the first volumes was after 1945, Gregory of Nazianzen letters, and now we are publishing for sure Basil and others. So we have skipped this artificial separation. And Now I have explained the competition with Vienna. I have explained the competition with the Teubner project, which collapsed because Harnack offered all these nice German school teachers who had a wonderful knowledge of Greek language, were curious to add it, and were able to add it. So Harnack took all these people, set them into contract, and had the wonderful plan, which failed completely, in 50 years to edit all Greek Christian writings of the first 3 centuries. So he was convinced in a time when thinking of 1891. So it's quite clear Harnack could think, I may have a chance to realize as a living person this finished edition, and the edition is finished, is not finished until today. And I'm not quite sure when we will finish it, because there is one problem. You have always to re-edit certain texts. Here are editions of Hippolytus from the Catina tradition, which are definitely not Hippolytus. And there is a new edition of the commentary in Daniel by Marcel Richard and other things. So the work is still ongoing, but we had to change the title. And that's the reason why the project is now named, as you have mentioned, Alexandrian and Antiochian biblical exegesis, because you're not allowed to apply for money for more than 150 years or 120 years with the same title. And so we changed the title. We are still editing Greek Christian writers, but we have no Church Fathers Commission, but an Aufsichtskommission, a commission supervising. That's a new term, and we have a new project term, but the idea is exactly the same. We are editing all Greek Christian writers, which are not edited until now by our friends in the Source Chrétienne and the Bibliotheca Patristica and all the other nice series. Those which we are editing, and especially Eusebius and Origen, but also other things. These are the plannings of the Berlin Corpus. Sorry for answering your first question so long with a whole lecture, and I promise to be shorter in answering your next question. So
No,
sorry.
that was extremely fascinating. I always like contextualizing um, events. So it, it's just so interesting. You brought this up in the 1860s, I think you said, is where this project really started. And you know, us Americans know what we were doing in the 1860s, and Germany itself. When was German unification? Was that 1871?
Exactly. 1871, and this brought the Prussian Academy in a kind of, how to say, National Academy of Germany.
Mm.
Also, it was not titled the National Academy, but the competition between Vienna and Berlin, and the competition between Austria and Prussia was
Yeah,
already before
yeah.
1871. But to a certain extent, when the German Empire was established and the Austrian Emperor wasn't still more the German Emperor, this was a kind of, how to say, 1-1 in the competition in the football game,
Yeah.
Austria-Prussia. So
And of course, there's the Catholic evangelische aspect to this. So you've got
yes,
the
for
Catholics
sure.
in Vienna doing the Latin, and then you have Harnack, the liberal Protestant, saying, "Well, we need to get the Greeks going because that's the original." It's just such a fascinating history. One thing I wonder, so someone who uses critical editions, I'm working on this very small project right now, which is a translation of the prologue to the Philokalia of Origen,
Mhm.
which itself has a fascinating manuscript history. But we've been reading Paul Ketchow, for example, has written extensively, and he's one of these German text scholars who produce these critical editions. Is how today we have all kinds of means to access manuscripts relatively easily, or at least to find out where they are, and a lot of them are digitized. But 150 years ago, that wasn't the case. How did Harnack and these other scholars go about acquiring these manuscripts that are spread throughout Europe? I mean, that must have been a tedious process.
In those days, most of the libraries catalogized their ancient manuscripts and published those catalogs. And in the
Mm,
Prussian State Library, um, which was quite near to the Academy's building, they tried to have all these catalogs.
mm,
Mostly by exchange. They sent, for example, their catalog to the Imperial Russian Library in St. Petersburg and got one catalog back.
mm,
And that was the first thing. But a second thing was that they were sending um, uh, certain of the editors of the series to manuscript search travels.
mm.
Traveling, searching manuscripts. And one example is I'm very sorry that I'm so unprepared, so I would
Ah,
present this to you. There was always the project to integrate the New Testament Apocrypha to the Griechische Christliche Schriftsteller,
mm,
Greek Christian writers. And there, the situation of the manuscripts catalogs were disastrous. And
mm,
so the um, Baltic scholar Alexander Behrens was sent to catalogize, to establish a kind of catalog of New Testament apocryphal manuscripts in Russian libraries,
mm,
especially monastery libraries and Greek libraries. And we have the very small booklet, handwritten booklet, where he catalogized, where he asked for all the manuscripts according to the numbers in, for example, the library of the synod in Moscow, in Moscow, or in Constantinople, Istanbul at this time, and brought together this. This is still unpublished, and
mm,
I gave it to the friends from the association, the Swiss French
mm,
Association of Researchers in the Apocrypha and Apocryphal Literature, to look for realized or unknown manuscripts. So
mm,
it's first using the catalogs and then asking, traveling, and from a certain time on, um, looking for photographs. We have, for example, for a quite interesting Armenian codex, Yerevan codex of the Chronicle of Eusebius, the Armenian version, we have photographs. And
mm,
when I
mm,
opened the box,
mm,
that was quite moving. There were very small pieces of bricks of the destruction 1945. And
mm.
obviously, before me, no one has taken the photographs out of the box. And
Uh,
there came lots of these very small bricks of when by the bombing
mm,
and in the shelters,
mm,
certain parts of stones came down or were shattered and came into.
mm,
So photographs and then later microfilms. And there were, how to say, campaigns. Hans Lietzmann, for example, went to the Vatican Library and other libraries and tried to set up a catalog, a specific catalog of the Catena tradition manuscripts, his famous Catena catalog. So we have in the neighborhood of the GCS, of the Greek Christian writers, unpublished catalog of the apocryphal literature. We have the published catalog of the Catena manuscripts, and we have a very large project that I should also bring, because that's also a quite big project for the hagiographical literature. Just a moment. That was not such a good idea. In the Texte und Untersuchungen appeared Erhards Überlieferung, and die Überlieferung und der Bestand der hagiographischen und homiletischen Literatur. That was a Catholic from Strasbourg, a patristic scholar, and interestingly, Harnack incorporated also Catholic authors. The Viennese corpus, beginning in, to be precise, 1864, never ever incorporated in the beginning Protestant scholars. But the Berlin did, and this is the transmission and the inventory of the hagiographical and homiletic literature of the Greek Church. And that's a very long on the Metaphrastes and others, this was published in the Texte und Untersuchungen series, and Albert Erhard tried to, to prepare an inventory, then to edit the whole corpus hagiographicum of the ancient church. And that failed completely. Never ever he did. There is no edition of the, martyrdom of Polycarp, and of all this hagiographical literature in the Greek Christian writers, but lots of other editions, and in the wonderful series of the Bollandistic order in Brussels. So it was a little bit, I would think, an attempt to compete with a Brussels team, and so it was a good idea not to build up on Erhard's catalog GCS volumes, but to present this to the community of researchers. We did a manuscript index, and this manuscript index to Erhard, he wasn't able to finish the work and to finish his plans, and so the index of manuscripts is visible and accessible at the webpage of our project at the bbaw.de homepage, so that when you are interested in manuscripts on hagiographical collections and homiletic collections, you can use the index for Erhard, which we set up in a typewriter edition now at the homepage. And to continue a little bit, there is the wonderful patristic text archive now. It's not only the editions in printed version, it's not only the TLG version or other versions, the ebook versions at the De Gruyter homepage, but it's also the patristic text archive, invented and guided by Annette von Stockhausen, the project director of GCS and antiochenische und alexandrinische Bibelexegese today. And so you have access also to the things in a publication process now. I should add one sentence concerning the publishing houses, because the publishing house Hinrichs, after 1945, got no license by the Soviet administration in Germany, and so separate publishing house of the Academy was established, the Akademie Verlag, the Academy's publishing house. And in the Academy's publishing house, until the 90s, appeared all GCS volumes except the Athanasius edition, except the appendices to the Athanasius edition, the Urkunden zur Geschichte des Arianischen Streits and Dokumente zur Geschichte des Arianischen Streits, the testimonies concerning the so-called Arian controversy, and the Gregor von Nyssa edition. Gregor von Nyssa was published in the Brill Publishing House. Athanasius was published in the De Gruyter Publishing House. That's related to Werner Jäger's, connections and networks, and Hans Lietzmann's networks. But now, after De Gruyter bought Brill, and after De Gruyter bought the Akademie Verlag, now all thing is in the Brill-De Gruyter consortium, and you can have access to all the famous books of our series in archive.org, in the patristic text archive of Annette von Stockhausen, and at the electronic book webpage of Brill-De Gruyter. That was how to say to direct people to our publications. Sorry for being so frank.
Well, the great thing about the De Gruyter volumes is I think most of them are accessible online. You can they get digital versions of them. The Patristic Text Archive is a great source for if you want to find I don't know how many it has on there. It has a good number of patristic texts in, I think it even has some manuscripts, doesn't it? It's got critical editions, translations, but I think also manuscripts, correct?
Yeah, and that's, I think, the breakthrough in the editorial technique by the digital revolution, which Annette von Stockhausen integrated in the patristic text archive. In those old days, you have an apparatus. We take the Hippolytus volume. You have an apparatus, and you have to trust the editor that the informations in the apparatus concerning the manuscripts are correct.
Yeah.
And I have to confess, I'm doing the edition of the homilies and commentaries of Origen in First Corinthians in our series. When transcribing a manuscript, there are some mistakes unavoidable. You are tired, it's difficult to read. In the beginning of the work, you are not familiar with the handwriting of a writer. So the problem is, are you correct? And there are these wonderful reviews when Markovich did the edition of Hippolytus, Miroslav Markovich, in the patristic Texte und Untersuchungen. The patristische Texte und Untersuchungen in De Gruyter was when Kurt Aland had to leave East Germany. He established, coming to West Germany, to Münster, the patristische Texte und Studien as a kind of help to overcome the loss of the Berlin edition, which he has to leave for political reasons. So Markovich was not published in the Greek Christian Writers series, but in the Patristische Texte und Studien. And Dieter Hagedorn wrote a quite angry review and said there were misreadings. And he asked for a microfilm of the leading manuscript, and he corrected misreadings of Markovitch, because he was angry about the whole principle according to which Markovitch edited Hippolytus. Markovitch was convinced on his forced as editor to correct Hippolytus according to the modern school grammar books. And so it's a quite corrected text. So the wonderful thing with the new digital version is you have via a link and via these tagged words and sentences, the manuscript behind the text. So you can control the editor and can look for that. That's a real revolution.
Yeah.
It prolongs the time for an edition because you have to tag and other things. It's far more easier to for example, to put a cross in your collation book for here is also a de or a noon or a men or whatever, the small particles or particle is omitted. That's far more easier than to tag the particle in the photograph, the digitalized photograph of the manuscript, and to link the tagged de or men, but it's friendlier to the reader. And because we have today, and that's completely different from the whole situation earlier. For example, I did a short edition of the letter of Ptolemy to Flora, which is transmitted in Epiphanius, Ponarium. And one of the main manuscripts is digitalized in an inventory of the Italian state of ancient manuscripts. And the wonderful thing is, when not quite sure whether this is don't know, a dative or another form of a Greek substantive, you can enlarge and enlarge it at the screen. And it's quite easy. Never ever, the editor of the Epiphanius edition, never ever could do. He was sitting, and I remember those days when the manuscript keepers in the libraries were extremely critical. Don't touch the manuscript. Don't touch. Now we are able not to touch, but to enlarge and to look in a form we would like to do. And so you're picking up some mistakes. Also, the quite careful and precise editors, and most of the editors of the Greek Christian writers, Berlin corpus, were extremely careful editors. Those editors, how to say, had their mistakes, and the Patristic Text Archive of Annetta von Stockhausen is a new generation edition. You can control and avoid all mistakes, and it's a kind of open science, so people can correct and can write to Annetta von Stockhausen and write in the edition of this and that is a mistake there. I have to protect me a little bit from sun. One moment. So our hearers and viewers have a second of a break. This gives me the chance, this offers to me the chance to present you my copy of Lietzmann's Catena catalog.
Can we just stop for a second? The catena, a chain, right? So this would be usually it has the biblical text, and then in the margins it's got running commentary from various church fathers or some variation of that.
I will bring the facsimile of a Catena manuscript. That's perhaps for all watching the podcast a nice idea, because I got in a Athos monastery a wonderful facsimile edition. One moment. Sorry, I had to run a little bit through the apartment to bring the book, but so I'm happy to be back. It's a quite large manuscript, and also the facsimile is quite large. And here is written Palaiadiatheke, Old Testament. That's a book binding as often in manuscript libraries of the 19th century. And then opening the manuscript, you realize immediately there is a handwritten signature,
Yep.
so it's not a printed book. And then when opening the book, you see the principle of a chain. There is the biblical text, and surrounded is the biblical text by a chain, so by an abridged and epitomized series of commentaries. There were biblical commentaries from the 3rd century on, Origen, for example, and probably the first biblical commentaries were done by those authors which we label Gnostics. And these manuscripts are quite interesting things, because looking to here, you see here small signs.
Yep.
So it's not one commentary, but these are parts of different commentaries. And the small signs here, I have to look, these small signs are abridged beginnings. This is, for example, the K for Kyrillos, Cyril,
Cyril.
and there is, let's have a look, there is probably also somewhere Origin. There is somewhere Origin.
Yep. So those signs with the letters signify when the beginning of the words of a particular author. So in that case, that signifies where Cyril's comments begin.
Yeah, and the excerpt most
Yeah.
most often the Catena authors in the German language, there is the expression Catenist, Catenistes, the Catena author. He not only copied sentences from commentaries according to the order of biblical verses, but he abridged often. For example, Origen has a wonderful style full of particles. One could think perhaps, possibly here in this or that case, that it may be, if I'm right, and the Spirit of the Lord will help me, that one could, in this case, the verse interpret as follows. And this is shortened, abridged, epitomized, because not enough space.
Yep.
Because in those wonderful manuscripts, you have also certain illustrations, so that you have not only the biblical text, but also a kind of golden chain, a golden collection. Instead of buying, which means in antiquity copying or ask for copies, 10 or 15 commentaries in lots of volumes, you have only these verses. And there is, from the beginning on, a large battle in the GCS series between Harnack and Lietzmann. Harnack was convinced we have to reconstruct the lost commentaries by the excerpts in the Catena manuscripts. And so he thought, for example, Origen is a wonderful example, or Eusebius. We have to reconstruct the commentary on the Psalms of Eusebius by putting together, and so to say, to being honest, to destroy a catena, because a catena, a chain manuscript, is also a literary work.
Yes.
It is, so to say, someone brought together a collection. It's like being angry about a collection of, don't know, English poems. I bought last year a small booklet, Poems on New York. And the author of this collection, bringing in Harnack, for example, collected golden sentences of Augustine. So it's a literary work, something worth of appraise. And Harnack was convinced, down with these late collectors, cutting down and editing Cyril in a Cyril volume, Origen in an Origen volume, and John Chrysostom in a John Chrysostom volume. And the problem with this is these are not citations as we are forcing our students, be careful, don't miss any word from a citation. You have to cite extremely correctly. And there is another problem, and that's a serious problem with the Catena manuscripts. These small authors' indications.
Can you lift up a little bit more? I couldn't quite see.
So sorry.
Yep.
These small authors' indications,
Okay.
as we have seen in red letters, Origen, Eusebius. Origen is quite often iota omicron.
Yep.
And they were the iota and the omicron and the iota standing in within the omicron. These small signs were not copied so carefully, so that often there is written Origin, not often, sometimes, and it depends on the manuscript, but there is written Origin, and it's quite sure that cannot be Origin. Or you, with the help of the TLG, you can identify, no, it's Chrysostom. So the Io for John Chrysostom, Greek, Ioannes, the Io for Chrysostom, and the Io for Origen. These were not, I mixed, it's quite clear. Io for John Chrysostom and Omicron, Rho for Origin, these were mixed. And they were carelessly copying, and so you have misattributions, so to say, or you have unattributed passages. So the problem is Lietzmann went the easier way when with his idea, we are editing manuscripts of collections. We are not reconstructing Origin, and there is that is a copy of Lietzmann's own copy of his Catena catalog, which we have in the Academy's library. The director of the corpus is not allowed to take it home. And the interesting thing is there is a paper which I copied too and will hopefully find, where Lietzmann, that's quite nice, where Lietzmann wrote which editions he already gave to certain of his pupils. Just a moment. No.
And while you're looking that up, I suppose we could say, so the person who's generally attributed with inventing or innovating the Catena genre is Procopius of Gaza, correct? He's usually the one who people say first started the Catena. Yeah, and he was what, mid to late 500s, if I have my years correct. So so he would have had access to manuscripts from various earlier church fathers, and he just would have well,
so to say, a Byzantine genre, like we have collections of medical writers, philosophical sentences of philosophical authors. So the way of collecting those biblical commentaries according to a new principle of arrangement, or not a new principle, half a new principle. It's still arranged according to verses, but now also according to a alphabetical or historical order of the authors. This is something which is typical for a Byzantine tradition. I have a certain problem but here are wonderful things. For example, um, the wonderful how Lietzmann tried to set up an archive of microfilms. In that archive of microfilms, there are here certain builds here. That's quite nice. Let's have a look. That's from Pompeo Sanzani, Fotografo, and here is for the that's a copy of the original for certain photographic labor in the Vatican Library. You have to pay this and that. And so we have an archive of lots of Catena manuscripts, and Lietzmann had the idea first to publish inventory volumes where for certain manuscripts, especially in the Vatican Library, which he loved especially, these parts of the manuscripts were identified. And the interesting thing is, Lietzmann's project failed to a certain extent. There were only 2 or 3 dissertations doing this inventory work, and Berlin still continued by extracting the fragments from Catena manuscripts and rearranging them in a kind of artificial reconstruction of the lost works. The French researchers did editions. Eckhard Mühlenberg edited, but Gilles Dorival, for example. These people, Mühlenberg and Dorival, in the last century, did editions of the integral Catena traditions without reconstructing the authors. Madame Arl, for example, there are in certain series now editions of diplomatic editions of Catena manuscripts.
So, as an example, I've done a little bit of work with the fragments of Origen's commentary on Lamentations. So we don't actually have his commentary on Lamentations. The parts of it that have survived are in these Catena in these Catenae traditions. So one approach would be, this would be the Harnack approach, it sounds like you're saying, is that we should take from these Catenae the fragments from Origen and try to reconstruct what his commentary on Lamentations would have looked like. The other approach is editing these texts as the Catena themselves to preserve the literary integrity of them. It is a difficult decision. Quite frankly, I'm a little I'm quite interested in the idea of editing the Catena as a Catena because this genre of literature has not received a lot of scholarly attention, and I think there's a lot we still need to learn from it.
You're absolutely right, but I think now in the in the time or in the age of digital editions, there is no need for a decision or an alternative because you can put together from a Catena edition immediately by putting one finger to the computer, the collection of all the Origen fragments. So I would think it will become easier and easier to have both. if
Yeah.
you have enough time to do a collation of the whole Catena manuscript. And that's a question, because there are obviously certain people who have not enough time and are only doing the collations of one series of fragments. So let's say the origin fragments. But the problem is most of these manuscripts are a little bit fuzzy, so you should look to all the other fragments.
Hmm.
Also, they are not labeled as origin by the red letters
Hmm.
in the margin. So
Hmm.
I
Yep.
would think I have studied the whole Catena on First Corinthians in the Parisian, Oxford, and Vatican manuscript, doing my origin edition of the commentary and the fragments of the homilies in First Corinthians. So, but this is quite easy because we have these wonderful Kramer editions of the New Testament Catena. So we have a kind of edition of the 19th century. So you can, don't know, at home or in the metro train to the Vatican Library, read the Kramer edition, and then sitting at the manuscript or studying at home the microfilm or the digitalized PDF, you can easily check the other Kirill, Cyril, and other authors. So I think the Harnack-Lietzmann alternative, reconstructing writings or editing the integral Catena manuscripts, will disappear.
Mhm.
Um, with the development of digital technique, you can have both. And
Okay.
that's
Yeah,
one of these wonderful things of the digital world.
absolutely. Um, okay, so the some of these problems with catenae, it's not always clear if their attributions to certain authors are correct. Well, this kind of leads to the question of what's going on in Berlin at the Alexandrian and Antiochian Biblical Exegesis and Late Antiquity project, because um, some of your colleagues have published. I don't. Is it completely done now? The um, Eusebius's commentary on the
No,
Psalms.
no, we have of 4 volumes, two, and the third will also appear soon. For certain reasons, it's a good idea to distinguish this into portions of 50 psalms, because Psalm 1 to 50 are only abridged in Catena manuscripts, and 51 to 95 is also preserved directly. So,
Mm,
so we have 1/3 of Eusebius' commentary preserved in an integral version in a Parisian manuscript. And then we have again another Catena, so the from 96 to the end of the Psalms, we have it again in Catenas.
mm,
And so a kind of editorial team consisting of Cordula Band, Barbara Villani, and the late Franz Xaverisch. That's a very sad thing that Franz Xaverisch died some months ago, but he was able to finish. He was able
mm,
to finish his part, and he was able to finish his part for the main introduction. So we have the third part, the Psalms 100 to 150. This is done by Franz Xaverisch, the third Catena part, and we have by Cordula Band. The second part, that is 51 to 71, and the 72 to 95, that will appear soon in the next month. And also the first volume, this is the Psalms 1 to 50 and the main introduction by Barbara Villani. And there is also related another volume that is the text of the prologues to the Psalms of Origen and Eusebius. So the edition of Origen's commentary on the Psalms and of Eusebius' commentary is connected, because there is a kind of conflation in the manuscripts, which now to describe precisely would be a little bit difficult and perhaps boring for the readers. But we are still working also on the edition of Origen. And one example of the mixture is that there were certain prologues for the whole commentary, but also prologues for the parts of the commentary. It's not by chance that there are these three parts, 1 to 50 and 51, and a third part. This is a traditional division of the Psalms, and so obviously there were prologues to certain parts and to certain questions, and excursus taken out as prologues. And so we thought it is a good idea to pre-publish these prologues, and after we have finished the Eusebius volumes, that will consist of 4 volumes, we will start with Origen. And I have to explain, we did something which is in the manuscripts. The biblical verses are in red. And I remember the nice discussion with the publishing house. The publishing house said, "Oh, that's quite expensive. You shouldn't do so." And we said, in certain ancient manuscripts, there were the names, the abridged names of the authors in red, and also the biblical verses. And because we have from time to time versions, and it's not a possible idea to take the volume of the Göttingen Septuagint edition, Septuagint edition, and to fill in the biblical verses, but we have also to edit the version of the Greek biblical text with which Eusebius or Origen used. And we thought it's a good idea to sign it with red color so that you can easily see, also with the citations. When there is a longer citation, you can easily realize this is a large part of the commentary is the repetition of the biblical verse or the citation of a certain biblical term which is interpreted.
Dilemma, correct?
Yeah,
So
exactly. The lemma.
yeah. So it's interesting to think about the production of texts in ancient Christianity, but if you read a critical edition of one of Origen's commentaries, there's always the biblical verse, and then that's followed by the commentary, and then when that's over, then you get the next biblical verse, and then so it does make it a little bit easier to kind of follow. What's interesting is sometimes you see the same biblical verse multiple times. I've seen where you'd expect to see the new one, you see, and I just kind of wonder, is that part of, so if we can think about like what's going on in the production of the text, was Origen or Eusebius giving a lecture, for example, and they read out the lemma, and the stenographer writes it down in shorthand, and then transcribes the lecture, and then through the editing process fills it out? Or was the lemma not part of the original lecture at all, and then it was inserted later into the text in the editing process? I still haven't figured out which one which option I prefer. But it does raise some very interesting questions. I think we have to be attuned to the presence of the lemmata.
It, that's a quite interesting question. I think it's quite clear that there was a kind of revision of an original oral procedure because Origin from time to time is citing texts. And my impression is we know from Eusebius there was a kind of, how to say, secretary
Yeah,
team of
yeah,
Origin. And this secretary team of Origin consisting of 6 people. So the question, is it a lecture or not, um, is not the central question. It's in every case an oral situation.
hmm,
Origin is dictating, and Eusebius is dictating. They were not sitting at a table as we are sitting
yeah,
today and writing or typing and picking up certain dictionaries, as Bernhard Neuschäfer has
yeah,
wonderfully shown. There is always consultation of dictionaries and lists in the beginning of the process. What's the meaning of the
hmm,
term? Don't know. A certain biblical term, nous or
yeah,
whatever. And then often you got the impression he is picking up, as I did during our wonderful chat.
hmm,
Um, uh, I'm picking up a book and
hmm,
citing from the book something, and the scribe or the secretary is writing down it, and then there is a process of correction. Origin is correcting, because you got the impression there are, especially in his homilies, more or less uncorrected passages where you have problems to follow the line of the sentence, or there are breaks in a sentence. And there are
hmm,
other texts where you got the impression it's carefully corrected before it was brought to the last, how to say, pre-publication form of a manuscript.
yeah,
I would think there were obviously lectures
hmm,
that we know from the wonderful Gregory of Thaumaturgos,
yep,
the Wonder Workers speech. And in the curriculum of the School of Origin, the biblical lectures were the top lectures for
hmm,
the students in their last years, the not the beginners classes. And it's also quite clear that there was, in the case of Origin, a relation between the lectures and the sermons given in this small harbor near a church. Um, and so it's quite clear, but the exact relation between the lecture and the publication, that's extremely difficult, I think. But,
yeah,
but it's
yeah,
quite clear, in every case, an oral situation. Um,
yeah,
Obviously, the we know from the homilies that Origen preached with a biblical text in hand and probably a very small sheet of paper of notices.
hmm,
There are, and my impression is the same for the commentary. I don't think that he put the dictionaries and word
hmm,
lists things first in a manuscript, delivered then a lecture,
hmm,
but probably he had these things in hand. The
yeah,
wonderful dictionary informations concerning, don't know the term usia,
yeah,
that's such a
yeah,
wonderful, where he is giving 8 definitions of usia and not using one. It's only for the
yeah,
sake of you are now completely informed about it.
yeah. Yeah, that's interesting you brought up Uzziah because I'm working with Perry F. Keith right now on prayer,
Hmm.
and there's that very fascinating section where he's commenting on the daily bread, epi ousion arton, and he
Yeah.
goes through the list of philosophical definitions of ousia, and it's almost as if he's got some kind of dictionary with him, and he's just repeating what these different definitions are.
Yes, and the interesting thing is when asking the question, what is the use or which kind of information you get from those possible interpretations of ousia from perhaps the Stoic dictionary of meanings of words from Herophilus. Um, the interesting thing is it's not said it's number two you should follow. So
Hmm.
so it's a little bit. I have always the impression. Sorry for um, addressing this. That Origen is a little bit like a confused professor. He is presenting. There are eight definitions.
Hmm.
Sorry, there are eight definitions,
Hmm.
and then asking the question, which one is the definition for epiousios? One, two, three, four.
Yep.
No, no, no. Now we know there is epiousios and ousia, and
Hmm.
the question how they are related. And my impression is always it's not a confused professor, but that's oral, a kind of oral, originally oral
Yeah.
presentation. Because I remember in those old days when I became professor, we used also to dictate letters to a secretary. And when not having the text like at a screen in front of you, you have difficulties to remember the line of argument or the argument. So you're not quite clear. I have cited now eight possible options for the meaning of ousia with the interest to understand which is the exact meaning of daily in our daily bread.
Hmm.
And so probably in that's something related to the situation of not seeing what you have written in the process of producing a
Hmm.
written text.
Hmm.
That's my interpretation,
Yeah.
but I have to label it. It's a hypothesis.
Yeah.
We are not sitting in Caesarea next to Origin and
No.
asking him, could you please explain us how you produce things? And we are not sitting near a Procopius of Gaza and asking him the question, what on earth you thought are there financial problems in your monastery or in your episcopal house or whatever, or in the city's library? Commentaries too expensive, or are you a lazy person and interested to have in one book all thing and too lazy to consult 10 commentaries? Or do you think that's for a not so but on the other side, there are wonderful tractates of Procopius of Gaza.
Hmm.
So it was a quite original thinker.
Hmm.
So these are these problems of riddles, still remaining riddles of patristic literature, and
Yeah.
wonderful because opportunities for following researchers to solve these riddles.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they'll probably stay that way as long as the current evidence stays the way it is, unless we find some kind of magical piece of evidence that proves it, which I doubt will happen. Um, okay, so perhaps last question then, because I think this is a big issue with the commentary or the fragments on the Psalms. Um, one of the discoveries your team has made is that many of the fragments that were once attributed to Origen were actually from Eusebius. Um, how how did you guys discover that? What happened? Take us through that.
I remember when I was a young doctoral student. This was in those times when the TLG wasn't very fast, so you couldn't sit and type in a word. You had to ask in the classics department to use to get 1 hour to ask, and after 2 or 3 hours you got answer. So no TLG. But I remember I was sitting in the doctoral course of Hermann Josef Vogt, one of the famous
Yep.
researchers in Origin, and his commentary on Matthew, deeply influenced by the French tradition of interpreting Origin. And I remember that Hermann Josef Vogt said, that's not Origin, that fragment. And I admired him for, because as a young doctoral student, you have no idea. And I thought, that's a real expert. And the interesting thing is, when since I would think 204, um, I was from 204 on, I'm part, not really part of the Eusebius Psalm editorial team of Cordula Band Barbara Villani, the late Franz Xaverisch, but from time to time sitting with them and reading the text. And because of reading since the early 90s of the last century, Origin for editorial purposes and controlling text, you got a feeling. You got a feeling of the way. For example, Origin, this clustering of particles. Here, perhaps it may be that one can see, as I tried to, he loved to pepper his
Yeah.
text with these. There is, in the last Originiana, I wrote about the tentative style of Origin. And this tentative style of Origin is expressed in a clustering of particles. And that's not Eusebius. And so from time to time, you got the impression, and then there are possibilities to check, is the fragment delivered in another manuscript as, or is it a combination of terms that remember us to another, or is there a theological beloved idea of Eusebius in the text? So when editing since many, many years, these texts, you became familiar. And now it's easy to check with the TLG. And I remember the moment when I first had this Hermann Josef Vogt feeling, that I thought, that's not Origin. No, that's not Origin. And then I went home, and there it's quite easy to type in it, and you got immediately it. So my impression is it's a question of familiarity with the text, if we have not classical, and it's editorial division, like some people had to identify glosses and later additions to texts. You have to, the wonderful is divination in the classical philological terminology. You should have the idea, and that's depending of your experience, of the knowledge of Greek language of an author, and to introduce the wonderful Annette von Stockhausen's ideas, certain AI and philological techniques of help. So it's easy to the distribution of particles in a sentence, the how words are combined, AI and digital techniques help. But that, I have to confess, in this respect, I'm a more traditional scholar. I trust my personal experience, and Annette von Stockhausen has the wonderful younger approach of experience plus digital techniques. And so I would recommend next podcast with her. Not that I'm the past and she is the future, but she's bringing into our wonderful Berlin team. And Berlin is a teamwork, was
Yeah.
always a teamwork. No good idea that I was sitting here. I should have all the late and still living and the future editors, and we are doing a teamwork. There is every Thursday a meeting. We are reading those texts and we are discussing those texts. And so the collected experience
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
content. There is one name written, Cordulaband, but Cordulaband got the recommendations, and Achilles in the first volume, the recommendations by Diels, Wilhelmowitz, Dillmann, Mommsen, and all the other. So it's teamwork. And it was a great pleasure to have the podcast again with you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a wonderful pleasure not only to have these podcasts and to watch them, but also to produce them with you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Markschies. The work you guys are doing out there certainly is part of this tradition, this living tradition of good German textual criticism. So keep up the good work. And yes, I think I will reach out to Annette von Stockhausen and see if we can get her on PatristiCast and continue this conversation. But for now, again, thank you very much, and looking forward to more work you guys are producing over there.
Bye bye. All
Bye.
best.